The Channel 7 News Gang. Van the Kid Amburg. He's not afraid to smoke out his own news stories. Big Jerry Jensen, a television news legend out here.
They rode in on horseback, deputized to rescue Channel 7's ratings. Believe it or not, this is an actual ad for Channel 7 News in the 1970s, and it was followed by a decade of the highest local news ratings in Bay Area history.
The Bay Area's most wanted television news team.
I'm Dion Lim, celebrating 70 great years of ABC7. I'm so proud to be a part of this television station, but even though I work here, I didn't actually know a lot about KGO-TV News' amazing history. And now that I do, I am so excited to share the incredible story of the 1970s with you.
Good afternoon, I'm Van Amburg along with Jerry.
The year is 1969. Van Amburg is taking over as lead anchor of Channel 7 News.
If you catch fish in the bay and eat them, don't.
Within months, there's a whole new format called News Scene that'll change local TV news forever.
Good evening, here's what's happening.
The basic format looks familiar now, but for its time it was a revolution, with crazy commercials, groundbreaking reports on social change, and a decade of history-making news coverage.
It's been almost 6 months now since the Indians took over Alcatraz.
Channel 7 News in the 70s was a no-holds-barred news operation that made up the rules as we went along.
The shows always included a major dose of hard news, but compared to the formal broadcasts of the past, the new format focused more on people's everyday concerns.
Is the Golden Gate Bridge toll going to stay at $1?
Consumer issues, health news, stories about children and education, even pop culture, all started to get more attention.
For the first time in television news, every single story revolved around people and what they were thinking and what they were doing. It wasn't events that we were covering. We were really covering people's lives.
I got a job, and I don't care what it is. I like the work. I enjoy working.
The news team itself became more relatable, and viewers responded.
Everybody was watching KGO-TV in those days. The format had changed dramatically, and all eyeballs were glued to that television station.
And Van Amburg was at the center of it all.
30 days old and getting older. That's the scorecard in the San Francisco City workers' strike at this hour.
Van was the ultimate promoter, known for clever teases, delivered very fast.
Coming up next on News Scene tonight, Marcus Foster-type murder, another one this time in Ohio. Fromm faces the court, says no. Oakland's kill count continues to climb at a record rate. And the latest on the two men who spent all that time for the murder they didn't commit.
Former producer Paul Jeske still remembers Van's tease the night a man was shot on the Bay Bridge.
He had 50 cents in his hand and a bullet in his head. We'll have film. How could you not watch?
The shows were so successful that many evenings more than half of all people watching television in the Bay Area were tuned to Channel 7. And they were not just watching Van.
I feel like we've grown up together.
It's nice to know Jerry Jensen.
Co-anchor Jerry Jensen was part of the winning equation. He was a solid newsman, also known for what, at the time, was a new concept: funny stories on odd topics at the end of the newscast.
When the Holy Trinity needed new recruits, they called on Playboy to do God's work.
Beyond quirky kickers, the heart of the Channel 7 News Scene format was a heavy focus on local news, which in the early 70s included a string of terrifying stories. From the murder of Marcus Foster, the first black superintendent of Oakland schools, to 15 people killed in racially motivated attacks known as the Zebra Killings, to the kidnap of newspaper heiress Patty Hearst.
It happened late last night. She was taken at gunpoint from her Berkeley apartment. So far, there has been no ransom demand at all.
Another key to the new format was sending reporters beyond the boundaries of San Francisco. That idea got even more important when BART opened in 1972 and people began moving farther and farther out of the city.
And it was not just a San Francisco station, it was a Bay Area station. So they encouraged us to go out to different neighborhoods and connect with people.
Reporter David Louis was hired in 1972, only the second Asian American on Bay Area television news.
There was a lot of curiosity. Who is this person who's coming in to report for ABC7? What's his background? Who is he? Especially in the Chinese American community, they wanted to know, what generation am I? Where did my grandparents come from?
Another critical member of the news gang was fearless forecaster Pete Giddings.
Cool in the north as the cool area is coming down.
Pete was the first professional meteorologist on Bay Area TV. He did his own forecasting with a reputation for accuracy, some pretty extreme polka dot ties, and environmental reporting. Like this series he did in 1976 on what was then the worst drought in state history.
Right now, at Crystal Springs, where I'm standing, I would be buried underneath 12 to 15 feet of water had this been a normal year.
He even bared it all to promote low-flow shower heads.
And it's been shown that you can take a perfectly good shower with them. And believe me, you can.
Pete was also part of the attention-grabbing commercials that were an early news scene staple. That's actress Suzanne Summers before she became a star. Other ads featured consumer reporter John Bryan.
Dust and a hearty hi-oh 7, the Action 7 Ranger.
When it comes to getting things done, Action 7 does it best.
Commercials like these added to the team's reputation for what some called happy talk, the chit-chat between the anchors that did not necessarily have a serious news purpose, but did make them seem like regular human beings.
The congressman's bill, by the way, would not outlaw massaging hands, arms, and legs, but would prohibit those ladies from tickling your fancy.
Get out of town and we'll rub you down,
Come
right?
on.
Some nights the audience was so big, Channel 7 News Scene was one of the highest-rated newscasts in the whole country. That brought Mike Wallace of CBS's 60 Minutes to San Francisco to find out what was going on. He was not a fan and blasted KGO for showing what he thought was too much crime and sex and not enough national and international news. General Manager Russ Coughlin made no apologies.
Isn't fire, crime, and sex news? Sure. I think we all deal in that. Even the esteemed New York Times, has to put a little sex in there once in a while, somewhere on the back page.
Van Amburg also stood by the station's People First format.
It has to do with the fact that I try to relate, I try to talk, that I do get involved, that I do solve problems, that we do things, that we get the old lady the house that she's been burned out of.
So it's not really a traditional news show in any sense?
Absolutely not. No.
Okay.
The traditional news show is the kind that we knocked off the air here.
Van was already under fire for leading a show with a report that a man's severed genitals were discovered on a railroad track.
At that time, the Santa Cruz murders were going on. Now, if we had found a finger beside a railroad track in the East Bay, we would have had it on. Now, I was not uptight about the fact that it was a male sexual organ. I mean, to me, there was a victim somewhere. Something had happened. This was grabbed by many members of the press and said, hey, look what they're doing to grab audience. We didn't cut that thing off and put it over there.
Whatever the motivation, the ratings kept growing, and so did the diversity of the news team.
Van, this is about as close as we're going to get to the bank, and we don't dare stand up because we are in the line of fire.
That's reporter Rigo Chacon, hired in 1974 after he was lured away from another Bay Area station.
It was like going from the Little League to the majors.
The population of San Jose had doubled in the past decade, so Rigo launched the Bay Area's first South Bay Bureau, while also working to define his role as the first Latino reporter on Bay Area news.
When I would explain to people in the Mexican community that I had to be objective, that I couldn't be a spokesman, they said, well, what good does it do then to have you there?
The good came from Rigo's determination to cover stories that better reflected the diversity of the community.
I brought to the table stories that had never been told. I brought to the table stories that wouldn't be told. I brought to the table stories that broadcasters hadn't thought of. So, yes, we made a difference.
Valerie Coleman also joined Channel 7 in 1974 as a reporter and weekend anchor. Valerie was the first anchor to appear on Bay Area television pregnant. At first, she hid it.
I wore a huge belt all the time. That was just my fashion. Because I did not know what would happen if I said, I'm pregnant.
Even after management found out, Valerie stayed on the air and became a popular part of the news team. But despite the look of this ad, women in the newsroom were still considered secondary. So in later years, Valerie would go on to push management to make female anchors equal to men.
When we look at it now and we see the number of women who are in key anchor positions, it's like, okay, I feel good about this because 50 years ago it was not that. 50 years ago, it was a pretty solitary course.
One place the news team was always united was serving the community, even when it was controversial. Back in the 1970s, coverage of child abuse fell into that category, leading to this editorial.
Look, I know it upsets some of our viewers every time we do a story on child abuse. We're not doing it to be popular, because what we're really trying to do is save some lives. I'm Russ Coughlin. As long as I'm general manager of Channel 7 in San Francisco, we're going to continue to serve the community in spite of that criticism.
Meanwhile, the community Channel 7 served was changing. One evolving story of the 70s was the demand for gay rights.
The statistics are overwhelming. Look at any crowd in San Francisco, and the odds are that 1 out of 3 is gay.
For many, the topic was still off limits, but Jerry Jensen and the Channel 7 news team spent 6 months working on a groundbreaking series.
This has always been known as a place that could accept people with different lifestyles. And certainly the gay lifestyle is a different lifestyle.
There's never been anything like it.
During the mid-1970s, Channel 7 led reporting on other major Bay Area stories too. The failed attempt to assassinate President Gerald Ford, the brutal eviction of elderly Filipino Americans from San Francisco's International Hotel. And in 1978, the passage of Proposition 13, rolling back property taxes.
The greatest tax crusader in American history, Howard Jarvis!
The station was also known for hard-hitting investigations.
I don't think you're going to like this story. It's about lending institutions that won't lend money for housing in certain areas. It's called redlining. It's illegal. More than that, it's disgraceful.
Reporter Steve Davis was asking questions about Jim Jones and the People's Temple in San Francisco, well before hundreds of Jones's followers died in Jonestown, Guyana. Steve's interview with the cult's former lawyer was a grim warning of what was to come.
There are mass suicide rehearsals going on in Jonestown.
Steve's reporting on the cult led to death threats. He and his family actually had to move out of their house as a precaution. Then, just 9 days after the Jonestown tragedy, Channel 7 brought viewers another stunning moment.
Both Mayor Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk have been shot and killed. The suspect is Supervisor Dan White.
The following year, Channel 7 cameras were there as riots broke out when White was found guilty of manslaughter rather than murder. It was a sad end to a decade marked by a lot of tragedy. But a new era was beginning. In December 1979, Van Amburg and David Louis led the first local news team to visit mainland China, which had been closed to Westerners for 30 years.
And this country of pagodas and temples and beautiful gardens is now racing toward the year 2000. They hope at that time they will have achieved parity with the United States and the Soviet Union.
It was an ambitious effort, connecting the Bay Area's Chinese community with its roots, a sign of how much broader the reach of local news would be in the next decade. Heading into the 1980s, stations all over the country were copying Channel 7 News' winning formula. Better technology made it easier to get news and pictures to viewers fast. The controversial format, that mellowed a little, but ABC7 kept the focus on real people and the issues that matter to them. Then, as now, we are committed to building a better Bay Area. I'm Dion Lim, celebrating 70 great years of ABC7.